Parliament is set to take place in January.
You cannot have the advisors to the government being the same office that prosecutes.
What sort of risk does Malaysia have to face if it is delayed yet again?
There will be public perception that it's not independent enough.
Hello everybody, Happy New Year. My name is Amalina Kamal and you're watching a brand new episode of Beyond the Headlines into the new year. This is where the top stories made the headlines and more. Now, as we step into 2026, Malaysians are no longer asking for reforms that are being promised. They actually want to see these promises finally become institutional reality. And so we asked the question, is Parliament actually delivering real accountability, and whether or not anti-corruption reforms move beyond slogans? And last but not least, of course, we want to see how we can finally measure progress while maintaining public trust. Now, of course, on set here with us to set the tone for the year ahead, we are joined by Raymon, President of Transparency International Malaysia. Welcome, Raymon, to Beyond the Headlines.
Hello, and thank you so much for having me.
I'm great and glad that you're here because I think 2026, we just entered it, right? But we do have a lot of things that we look towards to. One of it is obviously when it comes to governance, right? At least for Raymond, when you, before we go into the 2026 year, when you look at 2025, just briefly, can you describe how it was for you, or at least when it comes to governance, how it was for Malaysia?
I mean, again, just to highlight the matter at stake at the moment, I think there's a widening say-do gap at the moment, in a sense where aspirations might be clear, in a sense there's the vision, the direction is there, but we see very slow pace of reforms, right? But then again, we got to credit the Malaysian government to some extent, in hence, I mean, the 3 years that they have been so far in the government. We have seen certain reforms, certain legislative reforms that have taken place. For example, we had the Public Finance and Fiscal Responsibility Act that was passed back in 2023, 2024. We had also the Audit Act that was amended, right? And that now gives powers to the auditors to look at also GLCs in the sense of their accountability and whatnot. We had the Beneficial Ownership Transparency Framework that was added to the Companies Act. I mean, these are some of the good legislative reforms that had taken place earlier. And then this year, more predominantly, we saw the finally the amendments to the WPA, the Whistleblower Protection Act that was done. And then we had the passage of the Government Procurement Act, which of course I will go into it a bit more deeper as the conversation goes. Those are some of the key highlights that we have seen the Malaysian government work on when it comes to legislative reforms. But then again, when we talk about institutional reforms, right, legislative reforms is just one part, right? We've got to talk about how these things are going to be implemented, how it's going to be enforced, whether there's going to be oversight, transparency, and whatnot, right? We have seen delays in key legislative reforms that should have taken place by now, where what we have said before, low-hanging fruit that's not been done yet. There's also certain reforms that we look forward to because conversations are ongoing, but look forward to in the coming year.
Right. I mean, okay, a lot of things that have been highlighted there, right? But in terms of the key reforms that we're actually seeing, two things. The FOI, the Freedom of Information, as well as the other one would be Ombudsman, right? But before we go into that, because Malaysia is going into the new year with a fresh cabinet, or at least some vacant positions have been filled. However, I would say some of the most performing ministries did not see a shake-up. I think when we talk about reforms, we're looking at Datuk Sri Azalina's ministry here, and whatever she's been pushing out the past year, we want to see that spill over to the next year. And this is where I go into, okay, for FOI as well as Ombudsman. Do you, how would you, or at least how would Transparency International Malaysia characterize our current state governance today in pushing for these at least key acts or key reforms to be enacted?
I think it's time for the government to take decisive actions, right? In a sense, we don't see the same implications on the ground compared to what's being done at the top, right? End of the day, like I said, institutional reform demands proper implementation of the laws. We got to have proper oversight and whatnot. Yes, Bayu or the Bahagian Haliwan Undang-Undang under the Prime Minister's Department, we have engaged with them quite a bit. CSOs have been given space to speak. I mean, definitely space to speak. But then again, we had certain lapses in communication, we'll say that, because when we had the passage of the Government Procurement Act, for example, right, we did have consulting engagements with MOF, with the Ministry of Finance before. But again, we have never seen the bill. We have given our feedback on what's required and whatnot. when the bill got passed, it got passed in merely a couple of days, right? And we were not privy to looking at the bill, examining it, going through it, and then coming up with our feedback. It was passed through very fast, and it's a key legislation that we were looking forward to in the past 2 years or so. So I think we hope that going forward, our input is taken, and it's not merely just having sessions for consulting, but also taking our input in, our feedback and whatnot. We do see some progress when, as you mentioned just now, the Freedom of Information Act, a pro-tem committee has been established with Bayu, and TI is part of it, TI Malaysia is part of it. We are now looking at hopefully having something tabled by next year.
Right.
This is, again, we only have 2 states now that has freedom of information in place, which is Selangor and Penang, and we need one at federal level, so we're looking at the structure and how it could be put in place.
Right, okay. But I'm just curious as well to know, why do you think transparency, especially when it comes to Malaysia, still feels conditional in this particular context? Does it also reflect in how we are discussing about even this particular act itself, having this right to information? Because existingly, we only have 2 states having to arbitrarily, in a way, kind of like push for it. But we don't see take up from other state governments, right? And how can we move on with this?
I think the mindset is shifting in that sense. We do understand that to hold power to account, we need information, right? We cannot just lambast the government whenever that we feel something's not right. We need information or data to back it up. And the only way we can get that is if there are laws that let us gain access to such information. There will be certain laws that's already in place which may coincide with this, like the OSA, the Official Secrecy Act, that might come into play, that we need to look at amendments on that as well. But yeah, global shift, human rights requirements, we do require such legislation in place so that we can access such information.
Right, okay. This question probably is a burning one. Can institutions that are trained in secrecy actually realistically transform themselves?
I mean, I think we would always think about the defense, national security. I think these are most pertinent issues that are always brought up, and oftentimes we see a lot of leakages of funds, scandals at national level, right? It comes from the defense sector. To talk about defense sector, I mean, because that's one particular sector that's quite controversial when it comes to this. There are certain principles that are used worldwide. Like, for example, there's the Swansea principles that are used worldwide, where not every piece of procurement information, for example, needs to be made secret, right? It's just things to do with defense, or in example, for military use, technologies, probably those you want to keep it secret.
Or who gets the vendor, or who's on the vendor list.
But we still need basic information on how monies are spent, right? I mean, simple procurement does not have to be secrecy. They not need to be a secret, right? So I think there needs to be a balance between what the rakyat needs to know and what is secrets. What is a secret? Because we can't hold the same accord for both sides, right? I think that's an issue.
But okay, with that, right, when it comes to matters of like leakages and at least to, I mean, procurement in this particular context, I mean, we do occasionally get the Auditor General's report, and usually it will highlight big loopholes, and then we talk about it, and we talk about proposed solutions. But in terms of having to exercise these solutions, it's never been fruitful. Why do you think that's so?
I think what's exciting coming this year is the ambit of the Auditor General's scope of work at the moment because of the amendments to the Audit Act, right, like I mentioned earlier. Now GLCs are also under the microscope, right? That's a very, very big area that we need to talk about, the GLCs, right? Because the way you manage public funds, how is it utilized and whatnot. We have seen Auditor General's report come out year by year, and we have seen public agencies where they have issues of leakages of funds, integrity issues and whatever not. Yes, there's been slow, but definitely there are some recommendations that has been taken up by these public agencies. This can be viewed by the AG dashboard now. But then again, we shouldn't wait to be reactive. We shouldn't wait for Auditor General report to come out to highlight these issues, right? I think it should be a bit more proactive, right? If such issues do come up, if law enforcement needs to come in, such things need to be resolved as soon as possible, right? So I think we need to be a bit more proactive in that sense.
Right. And to our audience, I mean, I suppose why we're even talking about this, because government-linked companies, GLCs here, play a significant role in Malaysia's economy. And to some extent, they're not just operators, but they are also our finances, right? And they actually push for our SMEs to be better. I mean, in the capacity building, in ensuring that the ecosystem is pretty synergetic in that sense, right? But again, if there is no transparency, a certain level of transparency being pushed out, then we will have to address all the loopholes, like very reactively, and that's not the way forward, especially when it comes to like the Madani aspirations.
Again, what's the nature of even setting up certain GLCs? Yes, GLCs needs to be there. We have seen abuse in the past of GLICs, of GLCs and whatnot. So the true nature of why is it being incorporated, how the funds are being used, whether it is dismantled if it doesn't serve its purpose. I think these are questions we need to ask. And the only way we can ask these questions is if information is made available to us, right? So if such information is available to the public and we can access them, that's where we can make more pertinent decisions when it comes to this.
Well, going back to our aspirations, Parliament is set to take place in January itself, the new sitting. But of course, a lot of things are underway. At least for Transparency International Malaysia, what do you want to see being talked about or tabled for this particular Parliament sitting in January?
Again, I think not only the parliamentary sitting, I think the CPI is also going to be launched very, very soon, somewhere early in February. But yeah, there are a number of different pieces of legislation that's already been in the conversation, and we should see them seeing the light of day finally, right? And especially freedom of information is one that it should go out. We should look at the structure and how is it going to be done. We are looking at Ombudsman to be tabled soon, the Ombudsman Bill. Again, Ombudsman structure is still something being discussed. But then again, we should not treat this as a compliance checklist. We just do not just want to have the legislation. It needs to be implemented well. The structure needs to be right? And it needs to be enforced, and also the oversight needs to be there and whatnot. I mean, I can touch more on Ombudsman as we go along. But to talk about Ombudsman especially, we are very concerned about independence of it, right? What's the independence of Ombudsman? Because just to give the listeners a bit of understanding of what the Ombudsman would be, it's like a second line of reporting. In a sense where if a public agency takes in a report or is supposed to do something for you and they don't conduct it right, you can then report to Ombudsman, which can investigate and provide recommendations to these public agencies. Now, we are worried, like I said just now, about independence, number one. Number two is the scope. Which public agencies will be under the scope of Ombudsman, and we cannot neglect law enforcement agencies. They need to be part of it as well. Maybe also include regulators as well, right, to be part of the Ombudsman. And the reporting, whether reports are going to be made public, whether recommendations are going to be taken up by these public agencies, then we need to give some teeth to the Ombudsman unit as well. So those are some of the things that we hope will be in the Ombudsman side. Besides that, I think separation of power of the AG and PP is very crucial, right, especially in a country where we have this constitutional democracy. You have the legislatures, you have this executive and the judiciary. Now, taking a Westminster model that we have in Malaysia where the legislature sometimes and the executive mend, right? So, end of the day, I mean, it fuses together. We need the judiciary to be as independent as possible. The only way to achieve that is to separate the offices of the Attorney General and the public prosecutor, right? Because you cannot have the advisors to the government being the same office that prosecutes any form of crime and whatnot, because you may have those from the government as well.
I mean, logically, you would think that, right? But,
so,
sorry, yes.
I mean, conflict of interest has to be deterred in that sense.
Correct.
I mean, besides that, I think we should also see how the implementation of the Government Procurement Act that was recently passed, how is it going to be implemented? And lastly, there's a lot of talk about something that I'm looking forward to, which is what Tan Sri Azam has mentioned, the DPA, the Deferred Prosecution Agreement. That's something to look back at corporate liability or the giving side of the bribery in that sense.
I think MACC has been dealing with a lot of issues when it concerns that, right? Because
Yes.
a lot of, I suppose a lot of investigations take place. I mean, at the end of the day, and then when you see the results at the end, it's such a, I mean, you put so much effort in the beginning only to have a very, kind of anticlimactic sort of like result.
I like what you brought up though, because that is the feeling that the Rakyat has, right? End of the day, the trust deficit. I mean, trust deficit, this again relates to the CPI as well, in a sense where we are seeing a lot of cases also. For example, there are high profile cases which are compounded under AMLA, but then they are not charged under the MACC Act because there's a settlement that's being done. You see, things like that would erode public trust because they don't understand what's the rationale behind it. How can you compound someone and not take action on them based on the MACC charges? This does not make sense. So those are some of the questions that we are asking, because sometimes the aspiration or direction of the government shouldn't blur the lines of accountability. What do I mean by that? For example, if you look at the government saying that asset recovery is the priority now, but you cannot just recover assets without going after those that were that were part of wrongdoing in the first place, right? You can't just compound and not take action based on the MACC Act legislation and whatnot. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, when you laid it out like that, right? I mean, it's like counterproductive sort
Yeah.
of like factors at play here. Transparency International Malaysia works very closely with MACC as well in terms of its not just policy thinking but operations, right? How has that collaboration been thus far?
I mean, there's a difference between us and the other CSOs, civil society organizations. Yes, we represent the people, but we are not adversarial in that sense, meaning that we work with the government of the day. No matter who the political party is or whoever it is up there, we will work with them, and we want to work with them to ensure that good governance, transparency, integrity, accountability is practiced, right? So again, you won't see us at TI Malaysia rallying at any end rally or things like that. We won't do that, but we will work with the government, and we have a receptive government. The issue is that we don't see things moving fast enough, and also at times, not all the time, at times we see our input not being taken up, right? Especially of how we see the Government Procurement Act had passed through and whatnot.
It is quite frustrating, right?
Yes.
I'd like to go back to the point that you mentioned about separating the Attorney General as well as the public prosecutor roles here. Obviously, with what you've just shared, the deadline is 2026.
Yep.
Hopefully, hopefully. But what sort of risk does Malaysia have to face if it is delayed yet again?
The issues of, again, public perception of selective prosecution is still going to go on, right? We're going to look at sometimes the judiciary being used as a political tool, which I hope not, because again, the most independent and institutionally strong area should be the judiciary, right? When the judiciary collapses, everything just goes down.
So three branches of the government should be...
yeah, but the most independent should be the judiciary, right? Yeah. And they're holding the fort. So yes, I mean, conflict of interest will, I mean, the perception of conflict of interest will go on if we do not have this, or if we have it delayed. You would have, again, eroding public trust in the sense of how independent is the judiciary. And if you have more cases of DNAA, for example, or NFA, no further action, you will have people questioning the independence, right? The only way we can resolve this is to separate the officers. I think it's worth taking the time to look at it. Is also when the officers are separated, the public prosecutor has to be independent, right? He has to be answerable only to Parliament, and he has to be independent, and resources must be given accordingly.
So where is the gap then, especially when the public looks at integrity, or at least TI Malaysia looks at integrity, when our government, our Madani government, or at least any administration pushes for, you know, like all this like national aspirations, but then actual Malaysians are facing, or at least experiencing or observing something totally different?
Again, it's a long haul process. Again, this same conversation comes up when I get a question about CPI, right? CPI is a long game, right? End of the day, what kind of reforms do you do? And also the difference between legislative reforms and institutional reforms, right? Legislative reforms are just part of it. How do you then strengthen, how do you then implement it, enforce it, and ensure that accountability and transparency is there? It takes time. So the government cannot delay in, firstly, the legislative reforms to be done. From there on, we need to see implementation. Only when implementation is done, only then can those on the ground feel it and see the difference.
Okay, I mean, but Malaysia's CPI has largely plateaued in the past couple of years, I suppose. What sort of like, I suppose, reform or like push does actually change the needle a bit?
I mean, it's just 1 year so far that we've plateaued, right? So we are at 50 points. Let's see what happens in the coming year. But then again, it reflects, right? It reflects the current government, the efforts taken by the current government. It's not that they are not taking efforts. We don't feel it on the ground yet. The efforts are too slow. It needs to be expedited. And we hope that at least first quarter, second quarter of next year, things can go a bit faster than it is.
No, because people don't realize, right? For you to get like the results this year, the efforts must be done like way before, in advance, and that's how you see, I suppose, these readings then, right? In this particular context, how much does the result or the outcome of high-profile cases being trialed in court actually affects CPI?
Okay, when we talk about CPI, definitely, because we're talking about the people and also institutions, the perception that they have on the public sector at the moment. So it's when you have cases of such, and when you do not have the officers of the AG, PP not separated yet, again, there will be public perception that it's not independent enough, right? There will be perception that there's selective prosecution, for example. So the more we have DNAAs or NFAs, it will pose an issue. But another issue that I want to highlight is the part where I mentioned earlier, if charges are being put on AMLA and you don't take on charges like the MACC Act, and because the aspiration is for asset recovery, it may send a wrong message. I get that the intention is good, but it may send a wrong message to the people, and that would affect the CPI as well, right? Besides the high-profile cases that we see.
Okay, we're talking about having to continuously operate without any sort of like political financing or any influence in relation to that, right? But realistically, when we look ahead, how critical is improving our current SOPs and I suppose the environment today to ensure that the next generation and next future of leaders can actually cut that cycle?
Yeah.
I mean, even if any reform is being done, you would still see some remnants of it until it's
I think
fully
when we bring up this thing about political financing, I think at TI Malaysia alone, 15 years ago, we came up with a book with recommendations, right? We've been working with our CSO partners in the past. We've been talking about this for quite some time. Governments that have come in come in with the anti-corruption ticket, and one of which they do talk about political financing as well. But I don't know, it somehow gets diluted when they take over, and then every government that has taken over so far, every administration had their own draft of the bill of how they want it to look like. We need it. We need a political financing act, right? And the reason is simple. We need donor identification, where these monies are coming from. We need to set a level playing field in the sense of how campaign expenditure is being done, how is it spent, and things like that. We also got to ensure that the government machinery itself is not being used during campaign periods or during those times where these things to come up. So we got to ensure that political financing laws are put in place. Even if you want to compare with countries up the CPI, many of those that are up the CPI do have regulations concerning political financing, right? When you don't have such regulations, it opens up for abuse, and monies can be diverted to the wrong places. Yeah.
A lot of the general public don't necessarily realize how troublesome that this is, or at least how corrupted the practice is, right? So if you can just explain to them in terms of the political financing, sort of the movements or the practice itself, the line that gets blurred, right? So this is okay, that's not okay. If Transparency International Malaysia is able to explain that to our audience, please.
For example, large organizations, right, where they would fund political parties. At the end of the day, no one funds without a need for favor in return, right? So we do not want that kind of scenarios to come up. That's, of course, the most basic one. Besides that, we need to know where the monies are coming from, right? Because when money is coming from different areas, besides the private sector, there may also be personal agendas that are in place and whatnot. So I think it's important for the people to know where the monies are coming from. Like, for example, if you look like in the US, right? I mean, just an example, where you had, when the presidential election was being done, you would actually see on major news outlets that certain amount of money was donated to this campaign and whatnot, right? We need that kind of transparency. We need to understand whether the administration that comes into play would work in favor of certain large organizations, certain public interests, or certain interests and whatnot, not public interests, right? So I think, we need to safeguard or provide guardrails to this part.
Right. But even then in America, there's a lot of scrutiny that comes in, even though if it's to some extent the lobbying or like the gerrymandering is, in a way, it's like, I would say it's legalized, but it's a widely
it's how you define
sort
it.
of, it's really how you see it, right? But anyway, at the end of the day, reforms often lose momentum when administration changes. So because
I think it's also, like I said, the say-do gap, right? It's the aspirations are there. We continuously talk about good governance, but are we practicing it? And are we pushing forward the immediate reforms that we require? Because only with these immediate reforms can we see institutional change as we go forward.
Okay. You broke down in terms of how the Ombudsman would help, especially when it comes to oversight evaluation. But moving forward, are there areas where Ombudsman is able to also address, for instance, having to ensure that the committee or whoever have to push for it also are being made accountable? Because we don't want the act itself to be seen as invincible in that sense, right? Yeah.
I mean, end of the day, like I said, it's a second line reporting in a sense where we got to ensure that the public agencies that are there do abide by their code of conduct, and they do perform the services that they're supposed to. And we need to ensure that law enforcement agencies are included as well, right? And again, I think we also need to make it clear that Ombudsman's role is not to investigate. in the sense where, when you talk about law enforcement, for example, if MACC is looking into a case or a report has been launched, but if the person feels that after launching the report, no action has been taken, then they can go to Ombudsman. Ombudsman can question what the process was like. They can't question the type of evidence that MACC had brought in and whatnot, not the investigation, but whether due process was accorded to the person that made the report. So it's clear that now I have somewhere to go if I feel that any government agency or even law enforcement does not carry out the process that they are supposed to, right? So that's the role of Ombudsman. But they can only perform their role if they are highly independent, meaning they report under Parliament and they must be resourced well. And lastly, reports that they come out should be made public. And these reports, when made public, comes with recommendations. And recommendations has to be taken up by the public sector. It's only when all this flow in can you have a right structure of Ombudsman unit being set up. Because again, Malaysia does have Ombudsman unit. One of our states do have Ombudsman unit. Sarawak has an Ombudsman unit, right? So how much of the Sarawak version are we going to emulate, or how much changes are we going to make? I mean, those discussions are still ongoing to see how we can get a federal level ombudsman in place.
Oh, understood. There's a lot of stakeholders involved as well. Okay, but having to highlight that, right, we do understand that all this nitty-gritty of it all actually boils down to how people interpret how we look at not looking at decisions, how decisions are being made, how certain investigations are being made, only because we're so normalized to think that, you know, whatever the government says or whatever it is announced, we just take it face value. So how, as a public or as a citizen of a democratic sort of administration, can exercise good democracy, I suppose?
I mean, the civic space has to be given, and also, again, access to information as and when we require it. I think if you want to tackle, I mean, there's one of the biggest areas of concern in Malaysia today is definitely public procurement, for example, right? Public procurement, reports that come out, that 70% of reports to MACC today deals with public procurement, right? So how do you empower the people to have oversight on public procurement, for example? We need access to information. We need to know what are tenders given out, who are the contractors that have been selected, how much money has been put in place, allocated, is there cost overruns, is there leakages and whatever not. Only with access to information can we provide that oversight, can we report or raise concerns. I mean, there should be a body to take up these concerns, take up these reports. Right. So you can empower the people by giving them information and giving them channels to raise their concerns, right? And showing them what the outcome is going forward. I think those are areas where the rakyat and the people play a big part.
Raymon, I also want to get your take on, the Parliamentary Services Act, which we have yet to see it being widely discussed. Because again, the push is for it to, have a to strengthen our legislative sort of independence from the executive. And a lot of our people who work in the parliament also are saying that sometimes there are not enough resources to push for whatever reforms that you guys are pushing out, right? So how can we actually, drive the need for this better and not delay it even further?
No, I think the idea is we've got to fill in the gaps first, right? Because there are different pieces of legislation that should be put in place first, and to guarantee independence of those that are involved within these segments. Only once this piece of legislation has already been approved and been passed through, I think then we can have more conversations about the PSC, about the Parliament Select Committee, and then the legislation that will put through. But then again, I think the focus should be the key areas that we should look at institutional reform, legislative reform at the moment, and then we can affect it going forward.
So we're not going to see any sort of update in that anytime soon. No, because even the speaker himself, when he first took oath, he was actually looking forward to this, and I think a lot of people were also eyeing.
But slowly has been diluted. So.
Well, institution building remains a mixed story, right? But it depends on who's talking as well.
Also, like I said, making a change. Having legislative reforms itself does not guarantee that institutional change will happen, right? End of the day, if it's not properly enforced, it's not implemented well, it'll be pointless, right? So again, we need to see both going in tandem.
Understood. To end the discourse, because we have come to the end of the show, it's a very simple question. It comes to transparency and trust. But when trust erodes, right, Raymond, how do you think institutions are able to command moral authority?
when trust, I mean, we do not want to get to a point where trust has eroded to that extent, right? But end of the day, I think Malaysia is at a juncture where it got to make a very decisive decision, right? Whether to push forward the reforms that was initially planned, or to go on with business as usual. Because if you go on as business as usual, things will get bad, right? So I think my view is we have provided recommendations, ensure that these reforms are going to flow through, and ensure that it's done on a timely basis to give confidence to the people, right? Let's not reach that level where we don't trust the government, we don't trust law enforcement, or we don't trust anything that's provided to us, and we question everything. We've seen too much of this with cyber troopers now, so I don't want the riot to be that way as well.
And for you as a Malaysian, right, what do you personally value when it comes to integrity?
What do I personally value? I mean, again, for me, is telling it like it is, right? If there is an issue, be open about it, right? Discuss it and get it resolved. Let's not sweep it under the carpet. Let's not, hide behind any sort of veil that we can, right? So I think for me, integrity is being truthful and coming to terms with what needs to be done and get it done. Yeah.
Right. Well, thank you so much,
Thank you
Raymon
so
Ram,
much.
Transparency International Malaysia President, helping us cutting through the noise and actually ensuring us what we are looking forward to at least for 2026, right? And to our audience, if you do like this particular episode, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Don't forget to also turn on the notification bell if you haven't already. All our NSC online updates will be delivered to you, not just about the show. And again, I'd like to thank Raymon Ram for being here on Beyond the Headlines. And to our audience, don't forget to also follow us on our social media. We are everywhere: Facebook, X, Instagram, Threads, as well as TikTok. I'm Amalina Kamal, and we'll see you next week.